ironically, we're talking a bit about COVID. And I'll actually show you this. Look, you know there's a warning straight away when the YouTube clip comes up with a COVID warning on it. So this is the Q&A conversation he had over the weekend. And the first part of the conversation, they're talking about the lockdowns and what should have happened. I've got a bit of an introduction by Jack Tame, so I'll let him do it. And there's a couple of things in here. Have a think about what's said. I think there is just factually and easily provable factually wrong information coming out in this. Not big conspiracy theories. We're not going to have a debate about myocarditis. Nothing like that. Just factually incorrect information from someone with a UK perspective landing the same perspective on New Zealand. Sometimes when people commentate, there is a Northern Hemisphere bias, and they think what happens in the Northern Hemisphere is exactly the same as the Southern Hemisphere, where it can be quite different. Let's have a listen to the first part of this conversation. I think the first clip goes for a couple of minutes. And not just factually inaccurate things, but things that are, now he's obviously a very smart man. He's a renowned historian. He's got lots of letters after his name, but I'll say some things that are said that are just plain stupid. I think a smart person can say stupid things. We'll point to that as it goes through though. Let's have a listen to part of this conversation.
In philosophical terms, a society-wide lockdowns and subsequent vaccine mandates put significant restrictions on the individual in order to collectively protect the most vulnerable, right?
So I'm actually going to stop this because I'm going to reset this up as well. So from watching this, you'll get there's two kinds of people, right, when it comes to the lockdowns. They're the kinds of people who wanted to have their lattes and haircuts free and easy, and they're the kinds of people who didn't want people to die, even though it wasn't them. It was the vulnerable people that Jack's talking about. And I'm sorry, but I think you can only be in those two camps. You either wanted the world to be open so you get your lattes and haircuts, or you accepted, as much as you hated it, for parts of the world to be locked down for a period to save people's lives. I don't see how you can be in either both of those camps or another camp. They're the only two camps you can be in. The world open, or for a time, portions of the world closed, right? And I think what you're going to find with this is Lord Sumption, if you think of it that he's one of those, I want my lattes and haircuts, what he says makes more sense. Because when he starts talking about it and Jack comes back to him talking about deaths, he kind of hand waves it away. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So think about it like that. Even if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, people in the chat, but if there's two kinds of people who want their haircuts and lattes, no matter what, or people who want people not to die, have those in your head, and we keep hearing this conversation. Jack's just talked about the lockdowns helping to protect the vulnerable.
That's essentially...
Right.
That was what we were
could have been done without lockdowns.
How so?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because, I mean, first of all, the problem that most countries faced was that they went from an early stage down a coercion route. And once you do that...
True. A coercion route. That's what we did. We went down a coercion route. No one's going to disagree with that. But he's saying, unfortunately, we did that. Okay, we'll keep listening.
And once you do that, it's necessarily going to be indiscriminate. You can't have a law that says we have a different rule for people over 65 to people under 65. It's
Here's the first stupid thing he says, right? And I'll show you the quote word for word later on. But he says, you can't have a different role or rule, I couldn't quite hear what it was depending on his accent, for people over 65 to people under 65. It's too difficult to enforce. Now that's idiocy. Because Chewy, when are you allowed to start drinking? When are you allowed to start driving? Who gets the pension? In America, who can be president? You know, you have to be at school by the time you're 6 or be in. We have rules and laws all over the place, where there are different rules for people over an age and under an age. And he's sitting there saying, you can't have that. It's too hard to enforce. Now, unless he's an absolute kind of libertarian purist and thinks all drugs should be regulated, there should be no limits to, then it's a fair point, but I don't think it is. I think he's making a stupid argument to back up a point that he's making that's full of holes. Now, before I keep going, Chewy, do you want to add anything?
No, please let him keep digging.
Okay, well, here we go.
Route. And once you do that, it's necessarily going to be indiscriminate. You can't have a law that says we have a different rule for people over 65 to people under 65.
Like the pension,
It's
for
too
example.
difficult to enforce.
Exactly over 65.
Using persuasion is a lot more sensitive to the different requirements of each type of person, and it works. We know this because the one country that defied the worldwide trend and did something different was Sweden. They had no lockdown, they didn't close schools, they didn't close restaurants or other places, they only closed major venues
this point's
like
about to be
sports
made.
stadiums. And their results were roughly comparable to the European average.
So there's the Northern Hemisphere bias. The results were roughly comparable to the European average, right? Well, you're not in Europe. You're coming to New Zealand thanks to the free speech, and you tell us why our lockups and mandates were wrong. And your example is, well, Sweden was about the same as the rest of Europe. We're not the rest of Europe. That's not what happened here. And Jack points out the death thing right now, in fact.
That's a lesson which a lot of people are determined not to learn, but it's a lesson which is really vital.
I mean, compare Sweden to New Zealand. Sweden has roughly twice the population of New Zealand, according to the WHO statistics at the moment, about 5 times as many COVID deaths.
That's quite possibly right. But
Well, hang on. There's the hand wave. What? But you know
Children,
what?
get my horse.
But in Sweden, you could get your lattes and your haircuts. That's quite possibly right. So there's two kinds of people. So he's demonstrating right now he's not one of those kinds of people that cares about people dying. He cares about lattes and haircuts, right? So that's the camp he's in. Because just to say that's quite possibly right is hand waving it away. There's no other possibility there.
As many COVID deaths.
That's quite possibly right. But the effect is delayed. I mean, I don't pretend to be an expert on conditions in New Zealand.
Well done. Agreed.
On the whole, in Europe, travel bans achieved almost nothing. I can well believe that, given the geographical position of New Zealand, they might have achieved rather more there. But whatever they achieved
Cool.
can
Get
only
on a
ever be
plane.
temporary.
Fuck off.
Sooner or later, the country has got to open up, as it now has done, and it then gets the delayed effect that it avoided at an earlier stage.
If we were to face
Right. I want to have a look at that last statement as well. And I have actually scripted it down so we can have a look at what he just said. So here's the two quotes that I really want to knuckle down from this first part of the conversation. So the first thing he said, as I got written up here, was there's different, now I don't know whether he said roll or rule because of his accent, but well, either way, it doesn't really matter. Different role for people over 65 to people under 65. It's too difficult to enforce. Okay. So therefore we can't stop people who are 12 driving cars. We can't stop people who are 60 getting the pension. What are you talking about? Tons of our laws are set up when we have a differentiation based on age. So of course you can have different rules based on a differentiation. Now I know COVID stuff wasn't about age, but that was the example he used. But we have tons of evidence for differentiating between people groups for enforcing laws. Age is a perfectly good example. Now, the second part of the conversation that we just played, this is what he said. At the start of it, he said the effect is delayed. So what he's saying after Jack said, 5 times the deaths and 2 times the population, is he said the effect is delayed. Okay, so that says to me he's saying it will happen. The effect, the deaths, are delayed. It will happen. In that last part of the conversation we played, he said this. You can only ever be temporary, the effects, can only ever be temporary. Sooner or later, the country has got to open up and it then gets the delayed effect it avoided earlier. So the delayed effect that he's comparing it to would be deaths. Because if he's saying the delayed effect with the example of Sweden, then that means the delayed effects, the deaths will catch up, which is quite plainly false. Because what happened in New Zealand with our lockdowns and our mandates and how we handled it was we gave the population time to get vaccinated. And so what has happened is the COVID cases have caught up to the rest of the world, but guess what hasn't caught up to the rest of the world? COVID deaths. That's why our COVID deaths are one of the best in the world. That's why there's reports that say the government that we had in then saved 20,000 lives. Because, the number of people catching COVID, the graph has gone up, and that's caught up to be comparable to the rest of the world. But the number of deaths hasn't followed that route. It stayed pretty much down here, and it stayed far, far less. And that's because New Zealand had the time, because of the lockdowns, because of the closed borders, to get everybody vaccinated. I'm not having that debate with anyone tonight. It is empirical data that the vaccination saved lives and the lockdown gave us time to get the population mostly vaccinated. So he's wrong. The delayed effect will be avoided because of the time we had to get vaccinated. So it's fake and false information, and I'm a smidge disappointed that old mate Jack Tame didn't push back a bit harder on this, Joey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to see him set fire to his feet like he did to pretty much every politician in the lead up to the election. Yeah, look, I think this guy who is literally a boomer is going, well, I don't agree with the lockdown in the UK, and therefore I don't agree with lockdowns in general. Like he's just transplanting the UK experience over to us. The UK was missing several advantages that we had. We have just generally a lot more faith that our government is not out to fuck us over.
Well, we did. That might have shifted in the last 18 months.
It may have shifted a bit, but I still, to this day, even like as much as I dislike National, I don't think that they are as militantly out to get the working class as the Tory government is over in the UK. There is massive swathes of their population that have no buy-in to their central government, that have no trust in it, that second guess everything that they say based on history. It's the thing that they've learned over decades. So when the government comes out and says, we have to lock down to save lives, people didn't go, yeah, okay, this sounds reasonable and they've explained it well, I'll do as I'm told. They automatically went, fuck you, government, no way, something's up. And in the fullness of time, something was up. They were giving out contracts to their buddies. They were carving out, all sorts of loopholes for business associates. They were partying while they were telling people not to go and visit their nan and stuff like that. Their lockdown has nothing on ours. It was compromised.
Yeah.
It was just degraded to a point where it didn't work, and it just ended up to the point where they were saying, oh, we had a lockdown and it didn't work. Well, we're saying we had a lockdown, we had greater buy-in from our population, and we all bit the bullet and did it, and it fucking worked. And what that's doing is showing up a mirror to these guys and going, you could have done this, you didn't, you fools.
No, absolutely. And Mute Cat, I think, spells it out perfectly. Yeah, but Pat, old mate wanted the serfs to be there to wipe his ass, and they had to stay home.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do rambling around in a fucking estate for 2 months? You need the groundskeeper in. It's unworkable.
I just think as well, I don't have any problem someone coming to New Zealand and going, this is what we did in Europe. But what he's doing obviously is going, this is what we did in Europe. You guys should have done that here, especially like Sweden. It's like, well, no, there's a difference between you sharing your experience of what happened overseas. Fine. But then you saying that's how it should have happened here when what happened here was exponentially better than what your example is. Just fuck off. Just talk about hand wave. I'll just hand wave you away. It's ridiculous. There's a second part of this conversation I want to play. And it speaks more to the conspiracy theorist angle. He talks about what needs to be in place for a despot government to rise. I won't say too much more than that. I'll just let this part play for a minute or so. Here we go.
If lockdowns are instituted through a political process and the government of the day enjoys a mandate, is there any issue with the process side of things?
Well, not with the formal process. But the problem is, first of all, government messaging in many countries, I don't know about the position in New Zealand.
So why are you here?
Deliberately designed to induce conformity with the rules by, I think, exaggerating the nature of the problem, in particular by pretending that it affected everyone equally when it didn't.
Okay. First of all, that's not the case in New Zealand. We have evidence of that. I have evidence of that in the streets that I live in when COVID first came out outside Otago University. It was look after your nana and pop. That's literally, there was big signs about COVID, about people staying inside, look after your nana and pop. So again, I mean, he did say, I don't know how it happened here in New Zealand, but the reality is, so what? Yeah, exactly what you said. Why are you sharing what you think is the best way? Because we were constantly told from the front what population was dying, what population it was most dangerous for, who were we protecting, the elderly and the vulnerable, and we chose for most of it, whether some people hate the later lockdowns and they thought the first lockdown was good enough, but we did it in a way that best protected those people. So I think his example that he's giving from Europe doesn't relate to New Zealand at all. Because I mean, you correct me if you think I'm wrong, Chewy, I think it was very clear from the podiums that this was worst for the elderly and safest for younger people. But of course, then the younger people are the ones that could infect the elderly. That was the other thing as well. But
Yeah.
do you think that was
like,
fair?
I think our messaging around this was phenomenal, and I think to Susie Wiles and Toby Morris for their Flatten the Curve cartoon. I still remember that about the reason that we were locking down was to squash that curve down so our healthcare systems don't get smashed, to allow people to get time to get vaccinated, to just buy us time, which is something that was just, it's the advantage of being a tiny little island country miles away from anyone, is that we could buy that time. Places like Sweden didn't have that opportunity. Britain could have, I think, if they were braver, but they didn't because they've got a horribly compromised government. But what's galling is even they brought this guy over as an expert, right? And it's very clear he's done fuck all reading on what we did and how we did things. Like he said that basically word for word 3 times already. Oh, well, I don't know about the New Zealand experience.
No, but I enjoy your
Yeah.
wine.
Why are you here?
Yeah. Like
Why
I said,
are you here?
if he had to come across just to tell the story of what happened in Europe, fine, no problems. But he's actively saying this was a mistake. This should have been done like this. Oh, by the way, I don't know what you did here, but it should have been done like this. So let's keep going. We've got about another minute of this to go, I think.
By pretending that it affected everyone equally when it didn't.
It didn't. We know that.
But also, the reality is that historically, every despotic regime that has ever arisen has done it through fear. And fear is the great enemy of democracy. Fear.
Yeah, we'll get to this. So you're implying that the then government were trying to become despotic? That's what they're a despot group? That's what they were trying to do? We'll get to this at the end, Joey. But why would you mention that? You're basically saying the government of the time used fear. Every despotic government that's ever come apart started by using fear. So are you suggesting that that government was trying to become despotic at some stage? Is that what I mean, that's how I hear it, but we'll talk more about it at the end.
Will induce people voluntarily, and I accept voluntarily, to accept restrictions which, in a more balanced frame of mind, they would not accept. And that's why I think governments should be extremely careful about what they say in public. Again, Sweden was the model here. They treated people like grown-ups and not like infants who needed to be ordered around and told what to do.
So again, like there's still another 40 seconds of this to play.
Crack.
Yeah, but so Sweden, this is the thing, and I think I've already said it once today about the Gallipoli thing. Sweden treated people like grown-ups, his words, and not like children being told what to do. If you spoke to all those people in Sweden whose family members died, that didn't need to die if they'd done it another way, as is evidence in New Zealand, will they be going, oh, but at least they didn't treat us like children and we got to have our haircuts and lattes? Or would they rather be saying, I wish granddad was still here, I wish dad was still here, I wish so-and-so was still here? I would have a sneaking suspicion that they'd probably be keener to see their family member than go, phew, at least they treated us like grown-ups and we got the chance to make bad decisions ourselves.
Is this one of the guys that thinks that traffic lights are just against freedom of movement or something like that? Like, how dare they tell me how to navigate an intersection? They're not treating me like an adult. They're telling me that I must go on the green man. I do not wish to go on the green man. I wish to go on the red man. But that is my choice. And like, it's like Sweden is not the UK, and the UK is not Sweden, and we are not the UK, and we are not Sweden. We all had different choices to make. the cheek of this guy coming in. Like, I remember Sweden going, oh yeah, we think we'll ride this out, we don't want to impinge on people's freedoms. Fine, that was a decision that they made, and they had to bear the consequences of those decisions. They have a unique set of laws. I think I saw someone mention in the chat, Sweden has laws about restricting people's movements in peacetime. They would have to change essentially a big chunk of their constitution to do it. You know, the Scandi countries, they're freedom lovers, you know. So maybe that was the choice that they had to make in the framework that they had. But I remember when people started dying, and you saw people going, oh, maybe this wasn't great. It's sweeping through our old folks' homes and it's completely wrecking our economy anyway. Maybe we should have done it a different way.
Yeah.
We had the chance to work that out. Sweden didn't.
Let's get the last 40 seconds.
So what might the message have been then if we were to pursue a Sweden-like approach in other countries? What would the message be?
The message, for example, in the UK would have been exactly what it actually was before we introduced a lockdown. The message was, this is a serious pathogen. It is selective in the categories of people that it makes seriously ill or kills. We have got to shelter the vulnerable, people in care homes, people over a certain age, people with certain identifiable diseases. But otherwise, the object should be to maintain life as normally as possible, because that's actually the best way of keeping people sane.
And if weighing...
So that's the offset. Yeah, that's the offset, right? Keeping people sane is seen by people as more important than keeping people healthy. Now, look, I want to acknowledge right now that for lockdowns and for all those things, there were some significant mental health issues that went with it. There were some people who struggled hugely with it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's two possibilities here. One is you actively look after, and I'll change the haircuts and lattes, but I'll say one is you actively look after everybody's mental health, and B is you actively look after everybody's physical health. And again, I don't think you can have both of them. Maybe you can try and find the best compromise between the two of them. New Zealand unquestionably went down the path of physical health being the top priority. And yeah, there were some mental health issues that came with that. I'm not saying that's okay, and I'm not hand waving that away. However, the idea that we need to isolate the vulnerable and the people of a certain age and the people who are in care homes, etc., who looks after those people? People who won't be isolating, people who won't be kept safe from COVID, people who will be out and about on a Friday night at a pub, picking stuff up. It doesn't work that way. They can't be isolated and then have no one in, near, or around them. It actually works at the start, when we didn't know a lot, at the beginning of 2020, the best way to do it, which we actually proved when we got it out of the country for a while permanently, was to isolate everybody. I mean, think about that. At no point in this conversation has he said, oh, and you guys were COVID-free for 12 months when the rest of the world had it. It kind of worked. You know, it sort of did its part. And then the vaccines came, and then the restrictions lifted. Now, I do want to mention again this despot thing, right? Because I've got that as a quote as well. Let me bring it up.
Yeah. Now, that was a common sort of thing about Jacinda, was that she was being a tyrant, a dictator, a despot. So straight away, my ears pricked up when he said that.
So every despotic regime that has arisen has done it through fear. Now, we were talking earlier about what Winston Peters did with his text, with his tweet, and the subtle way he was laying some of the blame on the Labour government, the Prime Minister's office, as to what happened at the mosque shooting. Now, you don't say this unless you're actively saying they were attempting to be a despotic regime. Now, if that was the case, why did they remove restrictions? Why did they remove mandates? Why did they move down the path of more freedom after all those freedoms were taken away, and then allow people to get back to society? Surely a despotic regime that has arisen has done it through fear. There's another part of that, which is, and then increased and increased and increased and increased and actually become that despotic regime, which is not what happened here. So one has to wonder, Chewy, why he even brings it up.
I don't know. I know why Free Speech Union have brought him over.
Yep, go for it.
Like, because it's helpful for them to have a disruptive narrative around how our response went. There's a very vocal minority of people that have real problems with it, but we had massive buy-in from our population that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Yes, there's criticisms around the edges. There's some criticisms about some of the messaging. You know, I saw someone mention in the chat, "Hey, look, it wasn't all great. Remember 2 shots for summer." You know, that was a messaging that did not age well. But it's what the longer something goes on, the more chance you've got to get something wrong. You know, there was I don't remember the government saying this, so please, someone in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember in all of those lunchtime meetings where they, the press conferences, where they said that the vaccines would make people immune to COVID.
No, never said.
That it was more about slowing the spread.
Well,
But there was a lot of people, I think, there that assumed that it was a vaccine, so I get it, and then I can't get COVID. And then when it came out that there was a booster, or that you could get COVID, it's just the symptoms weren't as bad, that they saw that as a betrayal, that I was told that I would not get COVID with this vaccine. And I can't remember anybody ever saying that.
The thing that's actually more accurate, I think, Chewy, as well, is you get people now, and if you want to see some examples of it, just visit Sean Plunkett's Facebook page, who are saying things like, so you've caught COVID, got vaccinated, did you? Because the first vaccine...
That's what I mean, right?
But the first vaccine was something like 95% effective against the first round of COVID. And then COVID mutated, and each time it mutates, it gets a little bit less effective, to a point recently. Now, I know that there's a new vaccine that incorporates the latest sort of couple of strands, but up until the latest one, it basically was good to keep you out of hospital, but it pretty much wouldn't stop you getting it. But people are still saying today, well, we got told you wouldn't get COVID. And it's like, well, actually, on the first vaccine, but the first vaccine against the first series of the first strain of COVID, it was pretty damn effective. And then it's got weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And it's just like the flu jab you get this year won't protect you from next year's flu. So it's a bit of a kind of a pointless conversation, to be honest. But the other thing I wanted to ask the whānau about, was what is this Free Speech Union up to with this? Because as I said at the start of the show, I'm really interested to hear about responsibility with speech. I think I've shown, look, if I'm wrong, someone show me where I'm wrong. But I think I've shown how incorrect the speaker is. I think I've demonstrated how wrong his talking points are.
Laughably so.
Now, do we accept that if we live in a country that has free speech, we need to also celebrate people spreading wrong information? Now, then it needs to be asked, why would the Free Speech Union actively want to put someone out there to spread wrong information? Remember, he is not, according to, I've only seen the Q&A, to be fair. I haven't seen his actual message to the public, wherever those speeches are. But on Q&A, he was quite clearly saying, you guys did it wrong. This is how Sweden done it. This is how everyone should have done it. That seems quite clear to me. Now, if he had just said this was the British experience, fine. But it seems to me like he's come across to say, this is how wrong you got it. And if that's correct, if anyone's seen him, I'm happy to hear what he said at his actual meetings. But if that is the case, why would the Free Speech Union be interested in bringing someone to New Zealand, sponsoring someone here, to go around sharing messages that are factually incorrect? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got the free speech to do it, but what's the Free Speech Union get out of this? About someone going around and telling people that water is dry. What's in it for them?
Disharmony?
Yeah, but I don't have an answer. And remember, I've said this for a long time. I believe the Free Speech Union to be basically a psyop for right-wing talking points. And this is what they come out with.
Well, you look at what they've done, what the groups that they have sponsored and spun up, Groundswell.
Yep.
was again sowing disharmony between urban and rural, which I noticed an article that came out the other day that just poured fucking boiling water on that and said there is no rural urban divide in New Zealand. People understand how important our farming sector is. This artificial stoking of that has fractured the unity that we have in this country. They seem to spin up astroturf groups left, right, and centre. Their involvement with the Atlas group is incredibly concerning. They have constantly gone against our COVID response, and this just seems to be a continuation of that. And is that just an overall thing of eroding the confidence we have in our government?
I'm going to do something. I'm going to contact the Free Speech Union because I don't know too much about the story yet, but there was a group of either Palestinians or Palestinian supporters today that set fire to the Israeli flag, I think in Queen Street. The Free Speech Union better stand up for them, because whether you think that's right, wrong, good, bad, disgusting, or whatever, if they've got a right to share their actions of their speech in that way, I want to see if the Free Speech Union are going to put a line in the sand and say, yes, we support these people burning Israel's flag. I wonder how they relate to that, Chewie.
Yeah, no, I think they've been very selective all the way through their existence of whose speech they try to protect.
Yeah, and that's what I said. They feel to me, my honest held belief, that they are a psyop for right-wing talking points. For every one thing they do for, drag queen story time, they'll do 99 that happen to just fit so clearly in with, people speaking out against gender, or people speaking out against COVID, or people speaking out against Gaza. I don't know. I'm just spitballing, but that sort of thing. Warriors fan said this, and I did look it up. Sweden inflation 9.3, unemployment 7.3. Sweden is a mess at the moment. I looked up the inflation to see if I could find it. I saw it at 9.7. So that means that's going to be around about right. So does that any relation to the,
So why has Jacinda done that to Sweden?
And I noticed that you marked Chris's thing. Sweden had 2,721,000 cases and 25,000 deaths. Aotearoa 2.4 cases. Yeah. So there you go. So you can the number. That's what I'm saying. The number of cases may catch up, but the number of deaths are nowhere near.
Yep.
Are nowhere near.
Absolutely.
And that's the
look,
difference.
It's someone that works, in frontline retail. What he's asking there is for people that are not lords and barristers to keep working the shops, to keep working the service industry, to keep exposing themselves to every infected customer that comes through the door, to keep the economy going, to keep the shareholders happy.
Yep.
That's what he wants.
So
and he's going to dress that up and it's freedom. We give people freedom, and they're treating you like children.
Yeah.
Well, when mum and dad are trying to keep the kids alive, generally that's seen as good parenting.